8 days after my grandson's collar got yanked so hard he cracked the drywall behind him, I sat in a courtroom and watched the man who did it lose everything he'd ever built. But that Sunday night at the dinner table, nobody in that house had any idea who they were dealing with. They saw a quiet old man in a windbreaker who drove a beat-up Ford and complained about his knees. They had no clue I'd spent 3 decades taking down men exactly like him. My name is Walter Hensley. I'm 68 years old. For 29 years I worked as a senior forensic accountant for the federal government, chasing white-collar criminals out of a regional field office in Connecticut. I put men away who thought they were untouchable. I retired quietly, moved back to my hometown of Millbrook, and became nobody. Just a tired man with bad knees who bought his groceries on Wednesdays and kept to himself. That's exactly how my son's in-laws saw me. To my son Marcus, his wife Renata, and especially to her parents, Foster and Delphine Ashworth, I was furniture. Background noise. The old man nobody bothered asking questions. I hadn't seen my grandson Eli in almost half a year when the text came through from Renata. Just 5 words. Dinner Sunday. Eli misses you. No warmth in it, just an obligation being fulfilled. A few weeks earlier, I'd mailed Eli a birthday card with 2 $20 bills tucked inside and a drawing of a fishing boat, because he'd told me once he wanted to learn to fish. The card came back 3 weeks later, stamped return to sender in Renata's handwriting. I never mentioned it to Marcus. Some wounds you just carry. I drove out to Brookhaven on a gray Sunday afternoon. Their neighborhood was all fresh siding and 3-car garages, paid for, I already knew, by Foster Ashworth, who owned a chain of car dealerships across the county and made sure everyone within earshot knew it. I parked my old Ford behind his shiny truck and his wife's white SUV, and I nearly laughed, because 30 years earlier, I'd helped convict a man for running almost the exact same scheme Foster's dealerships were built on. Eli spotted me before I even got to the door and sprinted across the yard into my arms. "Grandpa, you came," he said. And I noticed right away he felt lighter than he used to. Thinner. And there was a bruise on his arm, yellow at the edges. At least a week old. Foster walked in holding a drink even though it was barely 3 in the afternoon. Broad shoulders, silver mustache, a face that stayed red all the time. He looked me over like he was pricing a used car. When I mentioned my old job, he repeated the word accountant back at me like it was something distasteful. "Numbers guy," he said. "I built something real. 3 locations, over 40 employees. You ever wonder what that feels like, Marcus? Building something?" My son stared at his plate. He'd spent 9 years working steady, honest logistics work for a regional company, and Foster spent the whole dinner grinding him down for it. "Your father raised you soft," he said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. Delphine laughed along. Renata smiled at her food and said nothing. Then Eli's foot bumped the table leg by accident. A little bourbon sloshed out of Foster's glass. His whole face changed. "Come here, boy." Marcus started to speak up, some small flicker of protest, but Foster cut him off cold, and my son sat back down. Eli walked around that table with his shoulders already halfway up to his ears. The exact posture I used to see on grown men walking into interrogation rooms. No 8-year-old should know how to brace like that. It happened in about 4 seconds. Foster grabbed him by the collar, hauled him off his feet, and slammed him into the wall hard enough to crack the drywall. There was a thud, then a small, strangled sound, like air leaving a balloon. Delphine kept cutting her chicken like nothing had happened. "Good," Renata said. "He needs to learn that." "Thank you, Daddy." Marcus half rose out of his chair, then sank back down and picked his fork back up. I have replayed that half-second 1,000 times since. I don't blame him for it anymore. I understand now what years under that roof had worn down in him. But in that moment, the only thing keeping me in my seat was knowing that if I moved wrong, Eli would be the one paying for it later, once I was gone and couldn't see it happen. So I folded my napkin, stood up calmly, and said I needed to use the bathroom. Foster waved me off without even looking at me. Try not to get lost, old-timer. I locked the door, sat on the edge of the tub, and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Lieutenant Roy Castellan, State Police, Major Crimes. I'd trained him on his very first fraud case back when he was 26. His voice changed the second he heard mine. Walter, that you? I need a unit at this address in Brookhaven. Witness to a felony assault on a minor, approximately 8 years old. Suspect is an adult male, mid-60s, intoxicated. The child was thrown against a wall hard enough to crack the drywall. He's still on the floor. The mother and grandmother verbally approved of it. I'm inside the home. I'm not in danger, but the boy needs medical attention immediately. We're rolling right now. Give me the address again. One more thing, Roy. The man's name is Foster Ashworth. He owns Ashworth Auto Group. Give the local chief a heads up. This is going to get loud fast. I splashed water on my face, looked at the exhausted old man in the mirror, and whispered an apology to a boy who couldn't hear it yet. Then I opened the camera app on my phone, started recording, and walked back out, holding it low against my hip. Eli was back in his seat, picking green beans off his plate one at a time, mechanically. The way a child eats when finishing dinner is the price of being left alone. Foster had already moved on, back to lecturing Marcus about how football built character and hockey was for soft kids. I kept the phone rolling and kept my face still. 19 minutes later, the doorbell rang. 2 state troopers, a local officer, a paramedic, and Roy Castellan himself, gray now at the temples, walked through that front door. Foster shot up out of his chair. What the hell is this? This is harassment. You're on private property. Roy knelt beside Eli first. Hey, buddy, I'm Roy. My friend here is going to check you out, okay? Then he stood and turned to Foster. We're responding to a report of felony assault on a minor from a witness inside this residence. Please sit back down. Witness? What witness? Roy looked at me. Sir, can you confirm what you reported? I set my napkin down slowly. My name is Walter Hensley. I'm this boy's grandfather. About 20 minutes ago, in this room, I watched Mr. Ashworth grab him by the collar, lift him off the ground, and throw him into that wall. I pointed at the crack in the drywall. He couldn't breathe right for almost a minute afterward. Mrs. Ashworth approved out loud. My daughter-in-law thanked her father for it. I have it recorded. Foster's face went from red to something closer to gray. You called the cops on me at my own daughter's table? Who the hell do you think you are? Roy's jaw tightened. This man is Walter Hensley. 29 years as a senior federal forensic accountant. Testified in over 150 federal cases. He trained me when I was 26 years old. When he tells me what he saw, I believe every word of it before he even finishes the sentence. The room went completely silent. Renata looked at me like she had never actually seen me before. The paramedic stood up from checking Eli. Tenderness along his upper spine, pupils a little uneven. I want to take him in. He's fine, Renata snapped. Don't touch him. Ma'am, that call isn't yours to make right now. Marcus stood, hands flat on the table like he needed it to keep from swaying. Take him, he said quietly. Take my son to the hospital. I'm riding with him. As they carried Eli out wrapped in a blanket, he reached out and grabbed my hand. Grandpa, are you coming? I'll be right behind you, buddy. I promise. Foster Ashworth was arrested at his own daughter's dinner table with a napkin still tucked into his collar. Assault on a minor, a felony charge. Delphine wasn't cuffed that night, but she got a serious warning and a promise of a follow-up call from Child Services. At the hospital, doctors found a hairline fracture in one of the bones near the top of Eli's spine. A little more force, they told us, and he could have been paralyzed. Marcus put his head in his hands and made a sound I'd never once heard from a grown man. Dad, who are you? He finally asked me. I'm your father, I told him. Everything else was just a job I used to have. I explained why I'd kept it quiet all those years. I never wanted him introducing me at parties as his father, the federal investigator. I wanted to just be his dad, the boring guy with the old truck. He asked why I hadn't shut Foster down years earlier, the first time the man started needling him at some family gathering. Because people show you exactly who they are once they think you don't matter, I told him. I was watching. I just didn't know it would come to this. Then he asked about Renata, about hearing her thank her father for what he'd just done. He asked what he was supposed to do now. That's not mine to decide, I said. But the state's about to file charges, and Family Services is about to open a file, and you need to figure out right now whose side you're on. Hers or your son's. You can't be on both. He stared down that hospital hallway for a long time. His side, he finally said. Always his side. We start there. The next morning, I called Adele Renshaw, a retired federal attorney turned family law shark, who stood barely 5 feet tall and had a reputation for terrifying entire courtrooms. Then I called an old colleague, Hank Dobrinsky, who'd spent 2 decades auditing dealership finances for the IRS. Ashworth Auto Group, I told him. 3 locations. I want to know if the books are clean. A long pause on the line. Walter, are we really doing this? I'm just an old man asking a friend a professional question, I said. He laughed and told me to give him a few days. I wasn't in any rush. Almost 30 years in that line of work had taught me one thing. Men who throw their grandchildren against walls rarely run clean businesses. Eli came home from the hospital in a soft neck brace, and he came home to my house because Renata refused to leave Brookhaven and had already hired a lawyer of her own. The first week, he barely spoke. He flinched at loud noises and climbed into Marcus's bed most nights after nightmares. I bought him a real fishing rod and left it standing in the corner of his room where he could see it. The first time he smiled again was the night he asked if I'd secretly been some kind of spy. No, buddy, I was just an accountant. I looked at numbers. Numbers are boring, he said. That's exactly why the bad guys never think anyone's watching. 2 weeks later, Hank called back. Ashworth Auto Group had been running a title washing scheme across all 3 locations for years, buying wrecked and flood-damaged cars out of state and reselling them as clean through a shell company. Over $1 million in unreported income. The registered agent on that shell company was Delphine Ashworth. Not just a bystander, a partner in the whole thing. The criminal case moved fast. My video, the medical records, the crack in that dining room wall, it was all overwhelming. 6 weeks after that dinner, Foster got a letter from federal investigators opening a fraud probe. Days later, the state pulled all 3 of his dealer licenses. His financing collapsed right behind it. Within a single week, He went from a man out on bail to a man with his entire business in ruins. Renata filed for divorce that winter, expecting an easy split. Instead, she got Adele Renshaw, who filed a counter-petition loaded with medical records, police reports, and sworn statements from neighbors about years of screaming behind closed doors. By spring, Marcus had full custody, and Renata was left with supervised visits only, contingent on completing a court-ordered program she never finished. Foster's trial started that March. I sat in that courtroom every single day. Delphine took a plea deal in exchange for testifying against him, claiming on the stand she'd been too afraid to intervene. Nobody believed her. The video did the real work anyway. The jury took just over 2 hours to come back guilty on every count. The judge told him that a grown man throwing an 8-year-old child against a wall, then sitting back down to finish his meal, wasn't just criminal. It was contemptible. He handed down 5 years. Foster never looked at me again. Eli was waiting on the porch with our dog when I got home that day. "He's going away for a long time," I told him. "Long enough that by the time he's out, you'll be too tall for him to ever try that again." The next weekend, we drove up to a cabin in Vermont, and Eli caught the biggest fish of his young life, grinning through a missing front tooth. That photo still sits on my mantle. That spring, Renata showed up at my door, thinner, quieter, asking to explain herself. I let her talk. She told me she'd spent her whole life afraid of her father, trying endlessly to earn his approval. And somewhere along the way, she'd learned that making her own husband small was the only kind of love she'd ever understood. When she finished, I told her she wasn't owed my forgiveness, and she certainly wasn't owed Eli. If she wanted back into that boy's life, she'd have to earn it exactly the way the court had laid out, one supervised visit at a time. Before she left, she asked if I'd been the one who tipped off the federal investigators. I told her the truth was simpler than she thought. Her father had committed fraud for years, and eventually the government noticed on its own. I never mentioned the 2 phone calls I made to old friends, asking what a concerned citizen ought to do with what he'd personally witnessed. Everything after that was just the system doing exactly what it was built to do. Foster destroyed himself. I only made sure the right people were watching. I still live in Millbrook, still drive the same old truck. Eli is 10 now. He stays with Marcus most nights, but he spends his weekends with me out in the yard, learning to whittle in my workshop, sleeping straight through the night without a single nightmare. He plays hockey now because he asked his father, and his father said yes. Some evenings, after Eli's asleep, Marcus and I sit out on the porch and just listen to the crickets. One night last fall, he put his hand on my shoulder and thanked me for the years I stayed quiet, and for the one night I didn't. I didn't say anything back. I just put my hand over his. People will spend their whole lives judging you by the car you drive and how little you say at dinner. Let them. The ones who matter will figure out who you really are eventually. And the ones who don't were never worth the truth to begin with. If this story meant something to you, hit like, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight, and subscribe to Aftermath Tales so you never miss the next one. Take care of each other out there, especially the small ones.